G'day guys, what is up? I am back with a few new tutorial series here. Hopefully we'll get back into it. I'll do a few more regular ones for GameMaker. What I'm going to do here is just go right back to the beginning and just kind of introduce a few fundamental parts of programming, because while it's good to do tutorials and stuff, unless you're actually understanding what's going on, a lot of this programming stuff's kind of just going to go over your head. And yeah, sure, you'll be able to follow the tutorial and come out with a cool tank game or a top-down adventure game or whatever. You're not really going to be able to do something yourself, which is what I really want you guys to be able to do. So I'm just going to quickly create a sprite here. This is the sprite editor. I'll give it a decent name, SPR block. I like to use prefixes in front of it. You'll find most GameMaker developers do, at least the ones that I've seen on YouTube, always put a prefix in front of things. It just makes it a lot easier to read code later on when you're referencing this stuff in code. Edit the sprite. I'll create a new one. I'll just keep the default size for now. Double click, fill it with not black. Let's fill it with a green color for now. Yep, we'll go white. I'll zoom in, draw a little red cross on here. Yeah, there we go. And paint bucket. Okay, there we go. Click the tick, and I've got my sprite block. All right, now I'm going to go down and create an object here, and I'm going to assign it that sprite that I made, and I'm going to call it OBJ block. Now I know I'm going through this stuff pretty quick, but I'm assuming if you've looked at GameMaker at all, you've probably gone over some videos already, or you've done it with me in class, and you should have some idea of what this stuff is all about. Whoops, I'm going to open that back up. I'm going to add in a create event. Now, all these events here, you can think of these as kind of functions that get called, and then it will execute the code within that function. Function's not really the right word for it. These are actual events that will occur in the program. And this here is kind of an event handler. So what will happen is this object will get created, and it will look in the object to see, is there a create event? If there is, it will run the code that's over here. There's other events here. We've got destroy. And this, if I put this in, then we can tell it what to do when this object is destroyed. Now, destroy doesn't mean game term. It actually means when this object ceases to exist. Now, that might be through a game event, such as getting hit by a bullet or a timer going down and it blows up. But it doesn't refer to destroy as in, you shoot it with a gun and it gets destroyed. It actually refers to the game object itself being erased from the program. We've got things like alarms here. So you can set an alarm to a certain number of frames, and when it gets down to 0, the alarm goes off. Mouse events, so that's like your mouse clicks and stuff. Draw events, they're really important. We'll look at those later. Keyboard events, so pushing up, down, left, right and stuff on the keyboard. I tend not to use these. I prefer to do it in code. Collision events are really useful though. They can be a lot easier to do using the actual event rather than write that in code. But there's advantages and disadvantages there. And then we've got the step event. This is probably the most important event in GameMaker. The step event occurs every single frame. So if you're running at 60 frames per second, this will occur 60 times a second. I'm going to put this one in. Don't need the destroy event. I'm going to delete that. So I've got a create event and then a step event. The create event is going to happen before the step event. And this is where I'm going to put things like my variables and stuff that I want to initialize. So I put in this execute a piece of code. It's on the control tab. 3 forward slashes. Currently that says execute a piece of code. Not very helpful. I'm going to put 3 forward slashes, and in here I'm going to call it initialize variables. Now when I click the tick, you'll see that now says initialize variables. I know what that code's going to do without having to double click in it. So 3 forward slashes will do that at the top of a line of code, at the top of a code block. Now in this code, we're just going to set up something really simple. Move speed equals 0. Now what we have here on the left is we've got what's called an identifier. This is the name of a variable in this case. And I could call this anything I wanted to. I could call it DRWER. as long as I refer to it the same name throughout code, it's going to work. However, DRWER doesn't mean anything. Move speed does. Then they've got the equal sign. This is the assignment operator. It will allow me to assign a value to that identifier. And lastly, I've got the value. I don't actually want to give it 0. I want to give it 4. Now, you don't need to put these little semicolons at the end of lines in GameMaker. And if you're really beginner, you can just leave them out. Because if you start putting them at the end of every line, you will have problems. But they should go at the end of every single command line, or something that will kind of do something in code, but that's not checking a condition. You'll see what I mean. I'm going to put them in, and you'll see where I don't. I'll point out where I don't put them in. But we've got a simple variable here. So we've got a variable, and then assignment operator, or equals, and then value. Okay, so we've got the variable name, the assignment operator, the value I want to assign it. I'm going to put in another one here, turn speed equals 4. Okay, 2 things here. So I've got 2 variables. Move speed has the value of 4. Whenever the code comes across this identifier, it's going to substitute whatever value I've assigned it in here. And that can change. That's why it's called a variable. It might change throughout the program. If I get a power up, I might be able to move faster. Let's go into the step event. Throw this step event in here. And in this one, I'm going to call this movement code. Okay, so that'll replace execute a piece of code with movement code. Much easier to read there. And now I'm going to put in what's called a conditional. Now, before I do this though, there's a few little terms that you'll hear me talk about quite a bit. These kind of brackets, I'll call them brackets for now. These are known as parentheses. This is not code, you don't need to type this in. I'll actually put a comment in front of it. Those are parentheses. These, the square brackets as people call them, are just brackets. And then lastly, I'll space those out a little bit so we can see them. These, some people call them squiggly brackets, are actually called braces. And then these ones are called chevrons. Now, we won't be using chevrons except for greater than and less than signs, but they're not really brackets in this case. Now, most people just call this brackets, brackets, brackets. These are round brackets, square brackets, curly brackets. I'm going to be referring to them by their proper names so that you get used to it. Parentheses are these ones up here. Brackets are the square ones. Braces are the curly ones or the squiggly ones. Now, whenever you write an if statement, we're going to write a conditional statement here. If, and I need to put inside parentheses a condition. Now, a condition is something that's always going to be true or false, in programming at least. A condition is always going to be true or false. It can only be one of 2 states. If I write if 1 is greater than 0, well, that condition is going to evaluate to true. Okay, in GameMaker, if we were to print out 1 greater than 0, it would actually just print out the number 1, which is true. If I was to go 1 greater than 10, it would print out the number 0, which is false. Because what it's evaluating to is a Boolean value, true or false, 0 or 1, yes or no. One of 2 states. So in this case though, we're going to use a function here to check a condition. Keyboard underscore check. This is a function. And after that function, every function, in fact, will always have parentheses afterwards. And most functions will accept what's called an argument. Now down the bottom here, it tells me what it's going to accept. It wants to know what key I want to check. Now I'm just going to check the up key, which is VK for variable key. I think it's variable key, up. Okay, so VK underscore up. It goes red, it recognizes that's a key. What if I wanted to use W? Well, I can't just write VKW, that doesn't work. I need to convert the symbol on the computer into its ASCII code by using a function called ORD. And once again, it's a function, so it has parentheses afterwards. capital W inside quotations inside there because I'm checking to see if this string letter has been input in. And you can see that I've got lots of parentheses here. So this set of parentheses is for the OR function. This set is for the keyboard check function. This set is for the if statement. Now you can in GameMaker get away with not putting these parentheses in around the if statement, but it is bad practice, and if you do it in other programming languages, it generally won't work, except Python. It will work in Python. Then I've got my braces. Now everything that happens in here, if this condition is true, and I'll change it back to VK up, because I prefer just doing testing stuff with those keys. It's just a bit shorter and more readable. If keyboard check VK up, then what do I want to do? Everything inside these parentheses, as long as this parentheses immediately follows the if statement, everything in here it's going to do. Okay, so I'm going to make it go speed equals move speed. So speed is a property of GameMaker object. There's loads of GameMaker object properties. I think if I bring up the help, if I go to game object, probably in search, object properties, let's see. There's not really much use there. More about objects, physics properties, parents, nope. Defining objects, nope. Let's just look up speed and see what it says. Okay, I'm not sure if there's like an entire catalog of all the different properties here, but speed is a property that belongs to the object. We've got other things like H speed, V speed, direction, which we are going to use in a minute, X, Y, etc. Whole lot of different properties in GameMaker. Speed is just one of them. And because this code here is on this game object, this here refers to the speed of this block. Okay? If I wrote this on a different object, it would refer to the speed of that particular object. Move speed, I defined when the object was created. I set it to 4. So if they're pushing up, speed equals 4. What happens if they're not pushing up? Well, if they're not pushing up, this condition is going to be false. So I can tell it what to do in the case that that is false. Else, speed equals 0. Okay, so in this case, if that is true, speed equals 4, or move speed. Else, if that's not true, speed equals 0. So I can test this really quickly. If I just run a room, create a room here, add that object into the room, and hit play. Now the default direction for everything in GameMaker is facing to the right. And so if I push the up key, it moves slowly to the right, which is exactly what I want. But now I want it to turn. So let's go back to that movement code. Make it a little bit bigger here. And turning code. If keyboard check VK left, direction minus equals turn speed. So I'm going to make it turn left at a speed of 4 degrees per second. Now I can't put an else here. That wouldn't make sense because if I just put an else and say direction plus equals, then it's just going to turn to the right when I'm not pushing the left key. So it'll be like one of those old cheap remote control cars you get that it's always turning to the right unless you make it reverse. So we don't want that to happen. Now, before I go any further, you may say, what does minus equals? What does plus equals do? Minus equals subtracts this value from this value and assigns it back to this value here. It is the same as doing this. Some of you may have seen this, direction minus turn speed. So if direction is 0, direction is 10, turn speed is 4, what this will do is go direction, the identifier or the variable equals 10 minus 4, so it sets it to 6. Just typing minus equals does the same thing. It's a little bit shorter. Times equals will also work. Divided equals does not work as far as I'm aware. Times equals should work though. Plus equals definitely work. So it will add this to this current value and then give it the new value. Instead, what I want to do is just put another check here. If keyboard check VK right, and that will work. I could put an else if, okay, but what that will do is it will mean that left turn has the preference. If I do it this way, if I push left and right at the same time, it won't turn because they'll be cancelled out by the -4 and the +4. If I do it this way and I push left and right, well, it's going to check this first and say, okay, well, he's pushing left. Let's start turning left. And it won't do this because this is an else condition, which only happens if that's false. So if I want to be able to push both at the same time and have it do nothing, I can just put two separate ifs in. So now what I've got, if I run this program, hopefully I got that right, and I'll explain the direction and stuff in a minute. It does work. You can see that the object is turning. There's one last thing though. I need to update the sprite, and that's really simple. Update the image. It's image angle equals direction. So we've changed the direction of the object, but the sprite still has the same image angle variable value. So it starts off at 0. Everything starts at 0 pretty much. Now what will happen is the image angle will update every single frame, because that's all in the step event, to match the direction that the object's facing. Okay, now it always starts off facing right. Why does it do that? Let's see. I'll just open up. I don't think I've got paint anywhere. Probably don't have paint. All right, I'll just open up a new sprite and I'll quickly draw this really rubbish style. Let's go edit sprite, new. Oh, I'll make this really big. You don't need to make this. Okay, I'm just going to demonstrate this really quick. Double click that, fill it with white, red, what? Okay, here we go. All right, so here's our sprite, and it starts off facing right. It's not actually facing right, it's just its angle is set to 0 degrees. Now, as we go up this way, this is 90 degrees. Okay, so pointing directly up in GameMaker is 90 degrees. Of course, pointing this way is going to be 180. And pointing down, this is going to be 270. Now you can set it to values less than 0 and higher than 360 and higher, and it will just accommodate it. So 361, it will just figure out, oh, it's 1 degree. -1 degree, it will figure out it's 359 degrees. It doesn't have a problem with that. However, the reason why when I said turn left, well, I want it to go this way. So I have to add to it, plus if I'm going that way. If I wanted it to go turn right, well, I have to subtract from it. I'm not sure if I actually got that right in there. I may have done the code around the wrong way. Oops, if you ever get this error and you can't click on anything, just check down the bottom here. Make sure you've got nothing open. So I'll get rid of that sprite. Click OK. So in here, left, I've got minus equals, which is wrong. I actually want it to be plus equals, and right, I want to be minus equals. I should have picked that up when I was testing it before. So here we've got some basic terminology that we've covered. We've covered what parentheses are, braces for enclosing code, keeping it nice and neat. Haven't covered what the brackets are for. Brackets are for lists. At level 1 NCEA, lists are not an issue. You don't have to cover them. We'll probably look at some later on when we look at grids and pathfinding, but that stuff won't be accessible. Okay, so you won't be assessed on that, but you will be, you will need to know what parentheses do, what arguments are, what braces are, etc. And so this video is really just an introduction to that. And in the next few videos, we'll get into something a bit more detailed. Okay, actually setting some challenges and some tasks for you to complete, rather than going through a series of tutorials.